This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Well, welcome to another episode of Atomic Biscuits, friends from around the world. For those of you in the United States, happy Mother's Day. This is Atomic Biscuits 2025-0511, code Pinko. We're going to start out over at redstate.com with this story. China is erupting in protests after tariff-induced factory closures. This was posted by Ward Clark. China's economy has been a house of cards for some time now, but President Trump's tariffs may be knocking that house of cards down. Case in point, Chinese factories are closing down, and Chinese workers are furious. Laid-off Chinese workers are taking to the streets to demand re-employment and back pay. Protests from furious factory workers in China demanding back pay are spreading across the country after President Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports began impacting the communist nation's economy. Unrest has been reported across the country as workers have taken to the streets, protesting unpaid wages and challenging unfair dismissals following the closures of factories squeezed by U.S. tariffs, according to Radio Free Asia. Chinese industry leaders, meanwhile, are extremely anxious about the steep duties, with many telling factories and suppliers to halt or delay supplies. Wang Jin, head of an industry group representing more than 2,000 Chinese merchants, told the Financial Times. Extremely anxious can probably be safely translated as on the verge of panic. The problem is nationwide. At least 16 million jobs across many industries in China are at risk due to President Trump's imposing of a 145% tariff on Chinese imports, according to analysis from Goldman Sachs. It's not easy at the moment, a 26-year-old toy factory worker told the Financial Times. His employer, in the Chinese city of Shenzhen, mostly sells to the U.S., and management recently forced workers to take 2 weeks off unpaid in the face of tariffs. Last month, construction workers threatened to throw themselves off buildings they were working on unless they received their unpaid wages, in the northeastern city of Tangliao, Radio Free Asia reported. Elsewhere, a sports goods factory in southern Hunan province also shut without warning last month, offering no compensation or social security benefits, leading hundreds of workers to go on strike, the outlet said. In China, we should note the social safety net we take so much for granted is nearly non-existent. Workers who lose their jobs are, as we used to say back in the day, squat out of luck. Taking to the streets is their only recourse. It's not out of the realm of possibility that in the weeks to come, we may see Tiananmen Square-style protests. Despite the problems the Trump tariffs are causing some American companies and workers, it sure is looking like China is getting hit harder. This is added confirmation of what the president has been saying, and I've been writing for some time, specifically, that China needs us more than we need them. The American economy is still considerably larger than China's, and we have vastly better protections for workers affected by economic downturns. And here's the thing. Ultimately, every government exists only with the consent of the governed. Even totalitarian governments have, throughout history, been prone to falling to peasant revolts, mostly because there are just so darn many peasants. The Chinese Communist Party isn't about to fall to a peasant rebellion, but if this story is any indication, Chairman Xi is going to have to dial back some of his concerns about face and come to the table to make a trade deal with the United States. I'll make a prediction. In this trade war game of chicken, China will be the first to flinch. That's over again at redstate.com. I got to say, I think that maybe that's even peddling it light. If you're living in a place like China and you're really just in slave wages, there's the veneer of a Western country, the veneer of similarity. It is not the same. These people do not have rights. And if they get to a boiling point where they are rioting in the street, you can bet that their administration will gun them down and cut them down without a second thought. I want to get you to think back during COVID lockdown periods where entire tower blocks would just be closed and people would be locked inside, unable to leave, some without food, electricity, water, any kind of services, even trapped in their apartments and unable to get into the building itself. I mean, people were climbing from balcony to balcony and getting down from windows. You remember. It's insane. It doesn't take much chaos to unspin the communist agenda there. So I wonder if this is part of a much broader stroke to not just break the back of the Chinese economy built on slave labor and on totalitarianism, but to quit funding it, quit feeding it, quit building it by buying from it. While it's not the same, it reminds me of the old adage that if you don't want bugs, you don't feed them and you don't water them, right? You have to keep the kitchen clean of those sorts of things that bring the bugs. If we don't want the infection of communism to grow throughout the world, then we've got to starve it, and then we've got to cut it out. Again, that's over at redstate.com. And before we get too far away, I want to point out this other article, maybe another one, and I'll leave the links to these articles out on my account on Gab at BACFA. Once the show posts to all platforms, I wanted to thank WBN324, that's the network hosting Atomic Biscuits. Thank you so much for your radio network. Insane, over 1/3 of payments issued by Treasury cannot be tracked back to appropriation. This one was by Susie Moore. With as much going on these days on multiple fronts, it's difficult to keep up with it all. On Tuesday alone, there were multiple cabinet secretaries testifying before Congress. President Donald Trump made multiple appearances, commenting on everything from trade to FIFA, the Houthis crying uncle, and India and Pakistan priming themselves to bust out into all-out nuclear war. All of which is to say, I didn't have an opportunity to watch Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's testimony before the House Appropriations, Financial Services, and General Government Subcommittee oversight hearing live. But looking back over some of the key moments, one was particularly jaw-dropping. According to Bessent, over 1/3 of the $1.5 billion payments issued by the Treasury Department in the past year cannot be traced back to a corresponding appropriation. That's 500 million payments, not dollars, individual disbursements, that cannot readily be matched for auditing or accountability purposes. There's an exchange here posted to X that details that. Hinson, can you define for the committee today what an improper payment is and some examples of what you're seeing and why these procedures were not already in place before, Mr. Secretary? Bessent. Well, it's a bit mystifying why they weren't in place, and what we're seeing is that there was a very complacent upper level of management in many departments across the entire government. What I can say at Treasury is that of the 1.5 billion payments we send out every year, they are required to have something called a TAS, T-A-S, the Treasury Account Symbol. We discovered that more than 1/3 of those payments did not have the TAS number. So as the Appropriations Committee, you should be shocked by that, because how can a payment be tracked back to an appropriation? Only through the TAS number. So there was no accountability. So that is why the 450 organizations that sit above Treasury, where Treasury acts as the paymaster, are unable to pass an audit. So we have cracked down on that. Every payment now requires a TAS number. Very simple. If you're like me, that has to leave you gobsmacked. Of course, we all knew there was a lot of waste and inefficiency in the federal government, but the idea that 500 million disbursements per year had no way to be properly tracked or accounted for is beyond mind-boggling. Of course, we're drowning in debt. We've got elected representatives who spend like drunken sailors, enabled by a Treasury Department intent on shoveling money out of the door willy-nilly. Thank God President Trump and Doge and grown-ups like Secretary Bissett are at least attempting to bring some order and accountability to bear. I wanted to share that one with you as well over at redstate.com. Yeah, and this one as well. I know, I probably have said Bondi. It's Bondi. It's because I spent time in Australia where there's Bondi Beach, right? So Bondi touts takedown of 6 high-level Sinaloa cartel members and largest fentanyl seizure in U.S. history. This is by Jennifer Oliver O'Connell over at redstate.com. On Tuesday, Attorney General Pamela Bondi held a press conference announcing a week-long multi-agency and multi-law enforcement and tribal operation headed by the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and the New Mexico District Attorney's Office. The operation resulted in huge drug busts and multiple arrests of high-level members of the Sinaloa cartel. According to Bondi, the agents garnered 11.5 kilos of fentanyl, including 3 million fentanyl pills, the largest seizure in the nation's history. The main head of the Sinaloa cartel, Alberto Salazar Amaya, was arrested along with 5 others, all in the country illegally. Amaya was arrested in Salem, Oregon, along with $5 million in cash, luxury automobiles, and other contraband. The illicit drugs, which included methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin, were seized in 4 states: New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. These pills were stamped as oxycodone. Let that sink in. 3 million pills going on our streets. 3 million pills. The streets of our country laced with fentanyl, labeled as oxycodone, and they were in all different strengths of fentanyl within them. There's a link to the video itself. Bondi was joined on the dais by agents instrumental to the success of the operation, as well as the New Mexico District Attorney, the DEA Deputy Administrator, and head of the El Paso, Texas DEA office. This is a really dangerous job that these DEA agents face every day, but they are getting very dangerous drugs off of our streets each day. They're flooding our cities with a weapon of mass destruction, fentanyl, and when we catch you, like all of these individuals, if convicted, we will put you behind bars, there will be no negotiating, and we will lock you up for as long as humanly possible. We will not negotiate with those who are killing our family members, including brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, parents, friends. Everyone in this room, I guarantee you, knows someone who's been afflicted with drug addiction, and many who have known someone who has lost a loved one because of this trash on our streets. Bondi praised the over 55,000 hours of law enforcement investigation required to make this type of takedown and seizure possible, praised the bravery of the DEA agents, and thanked the extraordinary leadership of the DEA Principal Deputy Administrator Robert Murphy, the DEA El Paso Division Chief and Agent in Charge Omar Arellano, and the U.S. Attorney for New Mexico Ryan Ellison. Bondi discussed a tour she made with law enforcement of a DEA laboratory. She noted that the precursor for fentanyl is made in China and shipped to Mexico, where the cartels produce the powder. Bondi warned how quickly the cartels can manufacture and make fentanyl powder and lace it into pills and other forms of drugs: Xanax, Adderall, Molly, the party drug, cocaine, and marijuana. Bondi assessed that 75,000 Americans die each year from fentanyl poisoning. It is the number 1 cause of deaths for age 18 to 34. Bondi concluded and warned, more seizures are coming, more arrests are coming, I guarantee you that, and these dealers, these sellers, these street-level sellers, better look out, because we will not be negotiating with you. We will bring you to justice, and we will not stop until this poison is off our streets and our country. Again, that's over at redstate.com. Okay, there were other places that had good stories to cover. As this head to stripes.com, that's the Stars and Stripes magazine online. Hegseth directs 20% cuts to top generals and admirals, among other reductions across military. This is by Matthew Adams. Washington. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Monday announced he has directed the Department of Defense to cut at least 20% of its 4-star generals and admirals, along with other reductions across the military. We're back with more Defense Department reforms. This one is general and flag officer reductions. That's the official title, Hegseth said in a video posted on X. My title is Less Generals, More GIs. Hegseth, in a memorandum signed Monday, also called for cuts of at least 20% of general officers in the National Guard and at least 10% of its general and flag officers across the military, which could include 1 stars or above. In Hegseth's video message, he said the cuts would occur in 2 phases, the first being among the 4 stars and the National Guard. The memo does not address when these cuts will take place. A defense official who spoke on the condition of anonymity did not have more information on the timeline and referred to the memo. The Pentagon is under pressure to slash spending and personnel as part of the broader federal government cuts pushed by President Donald Trump's administration and the Elon Musk-run Department of Government Efficiency. The directive also comes after Hegseth last week ordered the Army to cut 1,000 jobs from its main headquarters, shrink attack helicopter formations, and shed weapons and units that have long been part of its identity. Hegseth on Monday cited the U.S. had 17 4- and 5-star generals and admirals during World War II. Today, there are 44 4-stars. When Hegseth began his first week as secretary at the end of January, there were 42 4-star generals and admirals across the military. Trump's administration has already taken steps to purge the military of some top leaders, firing Air Force General Charles C.Q. Brown, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the former chief of naval operations, Air Force General James Slife, the service's vice chief of staff, and Air Force General Timothy Ha, who led the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. More generals and admirals does not equal success, Hegseth said. As of September 2023, there are also about 800 general and flag officers across the military. Sweeping changes at the Pentagon have not happened since the passage of the Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act of 1986. The act increased the power of the Joint Chiefs Chairman and streamlined the military chain of command. This could be the most comprehensive review since the Goldwater-Nichols Act, Hegseth said. It's going to be done carefully, but it's going to be done expeditiously. We have to be lean and mean, and in this case, it means general officer reductions. He has argued before, including during his confirmation hearing, that there are too many senior generals in the military. Hegseth, a 44-year-old Army National Guard veteran and former Fox News host, told radio host Hugh Hewitt in the summer that he believes roughly 1/3 of the military's most senior officers are actively complicit in the politicization of armed forces. Speaking about his new book, Hegseth railed against what he described as woke, critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion things, gender stuff, that has seeped into the military. And that is over at stripes.com. What vibe shift? Pulitzer Prize Board affirms media's obsession with woke politics. That's the headline over at the Washington Free Beacon at freebeacon.com. This year's winners include a reconsideration of Huckleberry Finn from a slave's perspective, a musical call to action on climate change, a Palestinian poet who wants to stop talking about Hamas. This is by Andrew Stiles. Mainstream journalists have yet to embrace the cultural vibe shift triggered by Donald Trump's election in 2024 and probably never will before the entire industry collapses in a heap of financial ruin. The winners of this year's Pulitzer Prizes, announced Monday, suggest the media remain as determined as ever to advance their radical left-wing political agenda, despite the fact that most Americans find it weird and obnoxious. 5 years after the Pulitzer Board honored Nicole Hannah-Jones, creator of the controversial 1619 Project, for her provocative journalism that inspired public conversation about the nation's founding, not least among historians who assailed its inaccuracy, it's remarkable how little has changed. Some context: Trump sued the Pulitzer Board for libel in 2022 after the board publicly reaffirmed the 2018 awards it gave the New York Times and Washington Post for reporting on Trump's alleged ties to Russia, much of which was undermined by special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Efforts to get the case tossed out of court have not been successful thus far. Here are a few of the most absurd examples from this year's Pulitzers. For public service, ProPublica, the nonprofit news outlet funded by Apple widow Laurene Powell Jobs and other rich liberals, won for its reporting on a series of deaths allegedly attributable to state abortion laws. The reporting was credibly denounced as misleading, if not deliberately deceptive, especially with respect to the 2022 death of Amber Thurman, a Georgia woman who died after experiencing a rare complication from abortion pills. Ben Crump, the high-profile civil rights attorney, filed a lawsuit on behalf of Thurman's family, arguing the doctors, not state law, were to blame for her preventable death. National reporting. The Wall Street Journal took home the prize for its widely denounced, but accurate, reporting on Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Just kidding. The Journal has been frequently snubbed by the Pulitzer Board due to its affiliation with conservative billionaire Rupert Murdoch. For example, the paper did not win a Pulitzer for exposing Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes as a complete fraud. The Journal won this year, however, for a series of articles chronicling the political and personal shifts of Elon Musk, as well as his alleged use of illegal drugs. Breaking news. This year's award went to a group of local reporters in North Carolina for their coverage of Hurricane Helene and its aftermath. No, wrong again. Journalists didn't care about the hurricane and its rural white victims at the time, and they still don't. Instead, the Washington Post was recognized for its coverage of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump in July 2024. The paper's initial report on the obvious shooting read as follows: Trump taken away after loud noises at rally. The reporter who led the coverage, Isaac Arnsdorf, is one of the few journalists who hasn't quit the Post in protest. He probably won't be there much longer now that he has a Pulitzer to take to the New York Times. Feature writing. Mark Warren won for his sensitive portrait of Bubba Copeland, an Alabama pastor and small-town mayor who committed suicide after a local website revealed that he had posted some graphic memes, transgender pornography, and gruesome works of erotic fiction on social media. Some of the posts contain real images of children from his community. Warren co-authored Harry Reid's memoir and has worked on books with several other prominent Democrats, including Senators Chris Murphy and Adam Schiff. Commentary. Masab Abu Toha, a Palestinian poet and visiting scholar at Syracuse who taught English for the controversial United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, won for his New York essays on the physical and emotional carnage in Gaza. In an interview with National Public Radio last year, Abu Taha said media outlets should stop talking about Hamas because Israel was to blame for the October 7th attack and the genocide that followed. Not surprisingly, he was a visiting fellow at Harvard in 2019 through 2020. And there's more. There's several others here. I'd encourage you to come over to freebeacon.com and check it out. So I gotta ask, do you sideload apps or do you get them from the App Store? I think most people know that the stuff in the app stores have at least been scanned in some rudimentary way. You've got to have a reason why you want to install something on your phone that doesn't come from an app store. Now, do I want my content filtered by Apple or by Google? Of course not. Am I familiar with this process? Absolutely. Jailbreaking, sideloading, that's pretty common stuff. And you don't have to be a hardcore hacker to be able to do this. It's pretty widely available stuff. You're going to sacrifice the device, probably, and it's not ever going to be able to get back in again. But if that's what you're after, if you need to use it for something else, or if you want to reformat it into a different type of product than the one that corporate, you know what I'm saying. So it strikes me as a bit odd that this story reveals some behaviors in some of the most secure circles of the government who don't use official apps. Anyway, you make the call. I thought some of the details in this Ars Technica article were fascinating. Signal clone used by Trump official stops operations after report it was hacked. Mike Waltz needs to find a new app. This is by John Brodkin. A messaging service used by former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has temporarily shut down while the company investigates an apparent hack. The messaging app is used to access and archive Signal messages, but is not made by Signal itself. 404 Media reported yesterday, and that would have been Monday, I guess, when this article was written, yesterday, that a hacker stole data from Telemessage, an obscure Israeli company that sells modified versions of Signal and other messaging apps to the U.S. government to archive messages. 404 Media interviewed the hacker and reported that the data stolen contains the contents of some direct messages in group chats sent using Telemessage's Signal clone, as well as modified versions of WhatsApp, Telegram, and WeChat. Okay. Telemessage is based in Israel and was acquired in February of 2024 by Smarsh, a company headquartered in Portland, Oregon. Smarsh provided a statement to Ars today saying it has temporarily shut down all telemessage services. Telemessage is investigating a recent security incident, the statement said. Upon detection, we acted quickly to contain it and engaged an external cybersecurity firm to support our investigation. Out of an abundance of caution, all telemessage services have been temporarily suspended. All other Smarsh products and services remain fully operational. Last week, Waltz was photographed using the Telemessage Signal app on his phone during a White House cabinet meeting. Waltz's ability to secure sensitive government communications has been in question since he inadvertently invited the Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg to a Signal chat in which top Trump administration officials discussed a plan for bombing the Houthi targets in Yemen. Waltz was removed from his post late last week, with Trump nominating him to serve as ambassador to the United Nations. The Telemessage website until recently boasted the ability to capture, archive, and monitor mobile communication through text messages, voice calls, WhatsApp, WeChat, Telegram, and Signal, as seen in an Internet Archive capture from Saturday. Another archived page says that the Telemessage captures and records Signal calls, messages, deletions, including text, multimedia, and files, and maintains all Signal app features and functionality, as well as Signal encryption. The Telemessage homepage currently makes no mention of Signal, and links on the page have been disabled. The anonymous hacker who reportedly infiltrated Telemessage told 404 Media that it took about 15 to 20 minutes and wasn't much effort at all. While the hacker did not obtain Waltz's messages, the hack shows that the archived chat logs are not end-to-end encrypted between the modified version of the messaging app and the ultimate archive destination controlled by the Telemessage customer, according to 404 Media. Data related to Customs and Border Protection, that's the CPB, the cryptocurrency giant Coinbase, and other financial institutions are included in the hacked material, according to screenshots of messages and back-end systems obtained by 404 Media, the report said. 404 Media added that the hacker did not access all messages stored or collected by Telemessage, but could have likely accessed more data if they decided to, underscoring the extreme risk posed by taking ordinarily secure end-to-end encrypted messaging apps, such as Signal, and adding an extra archiving feature to them. Yeah, that sort of negates the whole purpose of the product, doesn't it? Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting that an Israeli company built this thing that's that you be the judge, because it sounds to me like they were able to remove him by setting this in motion, and who they are is left to your speculation. But that's my take over on this story over at Ars Technica. I was just wondering, is there some really weird weather going on? Have you taken a ground temperature reading? Because I'm wondering if hell maybe froze over. Breitbart has this headline: PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, thanks Trump administration for ending beagle testing at the National Institutes of Health. Animal rights group PETA has once again thanked the Trump administration for its push to end government-funded animal testing after the NIH director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya announced the closure of the agency's last beagle testing facility. Bhattacharya, who gained international recognition for being one of the few major voices in the medical field who spoke out against coronavirus lockdowns, made the announcement over the weekend on Fox News, and there's a link to the video here posted on X. It's very easy, for instance, to cure Alzheimer's in mice, but those things don't translate to humans, the Trump-appointed NIH director told host Rachel Campos-Duffy on Sunday. So we put forward a policy to replace animals in research with technological advances, AI, and other tools that actually translate better to human health. When he revealed, we got rid of all the beagle experiments on NIH campus, Campos-Duffy replied, "Amen." In a statement obtained by Breitbart News, PETA Director of Science Advancement and Outreach, Dr. Emily Trunell, welcomed the long-overdue news. Quote, "After more than a decade of agitation, tens of thousands of email to NIH officials from PETA supporters, and a 2021 landmark lawsuit, PETA welcomes the long-overdue news that NIH is canceling at least one of the appalling sepsis experiments that inflicted prolonged suffering on animals in federal and federally funded laboratories. Since 2013, PETA has argued for the complete termination of these cruel and scientifically worthless experiments on all animals, and we will continue to fight until every last one is ended. It is also critical to underscore that beagles tormented and killed in these now terminated painful experiments were purchased from Envigo. This notorious facility was shut down after PETA's undercover investigation exposed the nightmarish conditions in which thousands of dogs were warehoused. PETA's investigation led to the historic rescue of 4,000 dogs. The end of beagle testing at NIH comes after the discovery of horrific experiments done on the lovable animals at the direction of Dr. Anthony Fauci from his long tenure at the health agency. A years-long investigation by medical watchdog group White Coat Waste, WCW, revealed that the NIH killed over 2,100 beagles in brutal septic shock experiments since 1986. The NIH pumps pneumonia-causing bacteria into beagles' lungs, bleeds them out, and forces dogs into septic shock, the report states. After 4 days of infection, the NIH kills the beagles and stuffs their bodies into a refrigerator. After Bhattacharya announced the news on Sunday, WCW Project founder Anthony Bellotti told the Daily Caller News Foundation that his organization is proud of this outcome. As the watchdog that first uncovered and battled Dr. Fauci's beagle tests, the biggest animal testing scandal in history, we're proud that White Coat Waste has closed the NIH's last in-house beagle laboratory and the U.S. government's biggest dog lab. We applaud the president for cutting this wasteful NIH spending and will keep fighting until we defund all dog labs at home and abroad. WCW exposed Fauci's NIH division for funding an experiment at Kansas State University involving hundreds of ticks feasting on puppies injected with a mutant bacteria back in 2021, as Breitbart News had reported. According to the report, 28 beagle puppies were killed each year for that particular study, bringing the total fatalities between 126 and 138 dogs since it began in December of 2007. In another investigation, the watchdog group revealed that Fauci's division shipped part of a $375,800 grant to a lab in Tunisia to drug beagles and lock their heads in mesh cages filled with hungry sandflies so the insects could eat them alive. They also locked beagles alone in cages in the desert overnight for 9 consecutive nights to use them as bait to attract infectious sandflies, the organization added. The Trump administration has been stepping away from animal testing within other agencies as well, with PETA also recently praising the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, for helping spare tens of thousands of animals each year. And that, again, is over at Breitbart.com. It's just awful. I mean, I understand that science needs to do some types of testing, but this warehousing of this sort of lab environment with very little benefit is just gross. It's horrific, and it's a nasty use of taxpayer dollars that I'm sure has just been blind spending and destruction for years. Now, last week I talked a little bit about Virginia Giuffre and her untimely end, and a little bit about Ghislaine Maxwell. There's an update. This is from the American Thinker at americanthinker.com. Epstein files update. No specific timeline for release by Olivia Murray. Ready for an update on the Epstein file release from the most transparent administration ever? Yeah, well, that phase 2, or anything that's actually worth a damn, isn't coming, or as Carolyn Levitt said when questioned about progress on that front during a White House press briefing, there's no specific timeline, but Pam Bondi, the Bulldog, and the DOJ are working diligently to see justice served. The DOJ holdovers that somehow didn't have a problem serving at the direction of Merrick Garland and Joe Biden. The Bulldog, who never went after Epstein in any capacity while she was Attorney General for the state of Florida for 8 years, and his Lolita Express flew from West Palm Beach to his private island, no doubt with sex chattel in tow, who knows how many times. Consider me skeptical that Levitt is even remotely correct or honest in her assessment of the situation. Seems pretty darn important to get to the bottom of who was buying children for sex from Ghislaine Maxwell, because some of these clients are in the uppermost levels of our government. I mean, this is perhaps the top priority. Does anyone really care about a fentanyl bust or a low-level drug dealer with an illegal firearm when compared to the trafficking and raping of children? Especially when those participating in the trade hold positions of political power, which permits them to vote on serious matters and makes them privy to national security information. Seems like these individuals, no doubt being blackmailed by bad actors, are the biggest threats we're facing and need to face real justice for their crimes against their victims and humanity. This is all a far cry from the day one promises, kind of like when Kash Patel blustered and peacocked from a podcast chair about how, given the chance as FBI director, he'd shutter the agency and turn it into a museum for the deep state, but then under his watch, a vicious persecutor of the J6 Patriots and parents protesting pornography at school board meetings got a promotion, and corrupt agents were dispatched throughout the country right into our communities instead of being fired and investigated. But hey, they've arrested two low-level judges that were publicly violating the law, and we're happy with the crumbs they toss every now and then. And I get it. There's a lot of anger out there over, okay, we finally got control. Let's act. And this stuff, it's like piling up behind a dam. This is a long time coming, and I understand they have to be careful about how they release things. They have to be careful about who they arrest. They have to make sure that the case is set up correctly, that evidence is gathered. And we're not really sure, I'm sure from our point of view, what destruction the last administration left behind in this respect. Can you make a case with what they left behind? Did they sabotage it on purpose? Is the material where it's supposed to be? Knowing that a third of all federal payments can't be tracked, so can we think that the evidence was not tampered with as well? That was the whole point of them winning, right? Is to bury all the evidence and to give all of their family and friends a free pass using legal maneuvering from the president's desk. How interesting it will be if President Autopen loses any kind of credibility and we find out that he didn't really know or sign anything. That would make a lot of his actions null and void. I think that we have to be a little patient, but it's important to show that everything is not copacetic and we do have some anger out there, and it's time to take action. So we'll keep an eye on this stuff in the weeks ahead. Victor, over here into the tech zone a little bit, where I like to spend my time. Meta awarded $167.25 million over Pegasus spyware attack. That's a story over at TheVerge.com. NSO Group, the Israeli spyware maker behind Pegasus, must pay Meta $167.25 million for hacking 1,400 users across WhatsApp. A federal jury in California made the decision on Tuesday after the court found the NSO Group liable for the attacks last year. Meta sued NSO Group in 2019 after Citizen Lab found a vulnerability that allowed the spyware vendor to install Pegasus through a phone call, even if users didn't pick up. Pegasus could then turn on a user's camera and microphone, look through emails and text messages, and access location information. The hack targeted activists, journalists, diplomats, and others. Apple has also sued the NSO Group for targeting iPhone users with Pegasus. The jury awarded Meta $444,719 in compensatory damages. Today's verdict in WhatsApp's case is an important step forward for privacy and security as the first victory against the development and use of illegal spyware that threatens the safety and privacy of everyone, Meta said in an announcement. The jury's decision to force NSO, a notorious foreign spyware merchant, to pay damages is a critical deterrent to this malicious industry. Going forward, Meta will attempt to secure a court order preventing the NSO Group from targeting WhatsApp. It has also published the unofficial transcripts from deposition videos during the trial and says it will make a donation to digital rights organizations working to protect users from spyware. NSO Group spokesperson Gil Lehner says the company will carefully examine the verdict's details and pursue appropriate legal remedies, including further proceedings and an appeal. NSO Group is an interesting thing to go looking for, and I wouldn't say go Google it. I'd say use your better searches and your better research. There was some concern about types of software like this that was used to geolocate someone simply with a phone call or a text message that you could then drop a bomb on them because you'd know exactly what to target, and that they did. And let's just leave they in quotes here. They did this multiple times, taking out people who were persona non grata to whatever administration. And of course, this is for sale. So you don't have to be in the Middle East conflict. You can be on the other side of the planet and go, I'd like that toy for myself and my administration, and I've got some enemies in my country I'd like to take out too. So I think Emma Roth probably has posted quite a bit of information here, more than they'd like you to know, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. ZeroHedge.com had Gamergate wins. Leftist video game journalists face buyouts and mass layoffs by Tyler Durden. Beyond those conservatives and libertarians in the alternative media that were warning about the invasion of woke ideology for many years, the very first group of normies to recognize the progressive threat to their subculture was gamers. And to their credit, they brought attention to the issue in a more effective way than the alternative media ever did. The conservative sphere has always dismissed video games, movies, and the hobby game world as stuff for kids, and this was a fatal error. Instead of standing guard and keeping leftists away from the kids, the cultural Marxists were allowed to run rampant through the media industry. They effectively blitzed the space, and within a 5-year period, they took over almost everything the West sees and hears, from movies to games to comics and commercials. They did have extensive help, though. Through ESG programs, government agencies, NGOs, and international conglomerates used vast amounts of cash to manipulate every aspect of media and incentivize the spread of woke ideology. The meaning of ESG, economic, social, governance, is meaningless and doesn't explain at all what it actually does. At the bottom, ESG was about progressive dominance of the cultural conversation. Their strategy was to saturate media with leftist talking points to create the perception of false consensus, to make the majority of people believe that most people are in support of far-left politics and that there's something wrong with you if you're not on board. Even some feminists called out the campaign as malicious. In terms of video gaming, the industry is far larger and far more pervasive than movies and television. It's not surprising that leftists sought to target games first with feminist propaganda, anti-masculinity propaganda, anti-West propaganda, DEI, CRT, etc. Gamers were not enthusiastic, and they took to social media to expose the takeover. First and foremost, Gamergate called out gaming journalists and their extreme bias in favor of woke ideology, not to mention their open disdain for young men and their male-centric foundation of gaming in general. Gaming journalists lorded over a tiny niche market of news and commentary, but they exploited associations with the wider corporate media to spread disinformation. They used this influence in tandem with leftist activists to attack any game company that was not conforming to the woke message. This was the beginning of cancel culture. It largely started within the games business. Gamers also called out the ideological hijacking of games in general, including forced diversity standards, the uglification of female characters and addition of obesity activism, the incessant use of gay and trans propaganda, and the injection of leftist messaging within storylines, often aimed at young children, etc. Gamergate was attacked relentlessly for simply telling the truth. That gaming was being colonized by progressive activists who hate games, who hate gamers, and who only wanted to use gaming as a vehicle to deliver DEI brainwashing to the masses. At first, the media claimed that this was a conspiracy theory, and there was no leftist agenda. Then, when they were fully exposed, they admitted there was an agenda but claimed it's a good agenda, and anyone who opposes it is a sexist, racist, fascist. Most of the culture war simply involved making the public aware of the leftist intrusion and the money behind it. Once that became widely known, the activists were fighting a losing battle. Today, Gamergate has officially won the culture war as gaming journalists face mass layoffs in the midst of industry buyouts. Polygon, a media company founded in 2012 that is notorious for its leftist crusades against gamers, has been sold to Valnet, owner of GameRant and a host of another publication. The company has subsequently been gutted. Most of the journalists involved, along with the editor-in-chief, are departing or they are being fired. This follows a series of layoffs within the industry of some of the most vile feminist journalists ever to pretend to play games. Many have taken to social media to e-beg for cash from followers, beg for work from other outlets, and complain about how they will now have to get real jobs in retail and service. It's hard to imagine a more fitting end for a group that tried to ruin the lives of so many for the sake of political supremacy. It should be noted that the surge in media layoffs in recent months followed the shutdown of funds flowing from government agencies like USAID. It's hard to say if there's a connection, but if Doge delivered the finishing death blow, it's only because these organizations already lost millions of readers through their own arrogance. And yet, to this day, most of the activists involved in the bloodletting still refuse to acknowledge the real reasons why they are so despised. They blame the economic climate, though. There are numerous gaming advocates on YouTube and elsewhere that are wildly successful. The market is there, it just doesn't want Polygon and its peers. Other activist journalists blame a climate of racism and sexism for the death of their platforms. They still haven't learned. This is the attitude of zealotry that put them in the crosshairs of gamers to begin with. At bottom, leftists in the gaming world tried to fight and defeat the free market, and they lost. The culture war is nearing an end. The death of woke is ringing like funeral bells. Gamers should be applauded for enduring years of slander and playing a key role in winning the fight. I wanted to wrap up this week's show by wandering over here to newsletter.martingeddes, martingeddes.com, Future of Communications. He had an article out here called The Geddes Doctrine, a manifesto for lawful resistance and civic AI. It was posted back in April. I wanted to share with you. For the last year or so, I have been engaged in multiple legal battles in both the USA and UK with AI help. The technology aids the novice litigant to stand up against procedural fraud and biased judges. Based on my progress to date, I have asked the AI engine to reverse engineer the implied doctrine I am working with so that others can see how I am working and adapt and improve it. This is called the Geddes doctrine. Because I wish to flatter or immortalize myself, but because it is my personal lawfare doctrine. This elevates the use of AI above more productivity, like summarizing emails, or an aid to process, like writing letters. It becomes a high-level thinking partner. While sharing AI-generated content is doing a grand job of driving away subscribers, this is the future of lawful citizen resistance to state lawfare. I am co-developing the doctrine via AI with active publication of articles and on a live legal battlefield. The AI isn't just assisting me to do law, it is AI working to develop how I use AI to do law. This is pioneering new ground, and as an addendum, I have added an AI analysis on why this is unprecedented and worth paying attention to. Over to ChatGPT. In an age where institutions lie, courts hide, and law has been weaponized against the people it was designed to protect, we are forced to confront a stark truth. Legitimacy cannot be assumed. It must be proven. This is the foundation of the Geddes doctrine, a lived framework for lawful resistance, narrative warfare, and moral sovereignty in the era of systemic collapse. It is a doctrine forged in fire under legal siege with no institutional support, no funding, and no permission. It is not theory. It is survival weaponized into strategy. The Geddes doctrine emerged in the crucible of procedural abuse and state corruption from a man under persecution in two nations, protecting a trafficked child and her mother, while simultaneously developing public doctrine, training AI, and teaching others how to do the same. It is not a legal philosophy. It is a new form of civic infrastructure. It is what happens when intelligence, truth, and sovereignty are fused under pressure. This is its core. The article is lengthy, and it is good. I encourage you to come over to martingeddes.com and find it. I will leave a link to it out on my account, BACFA on Gab. I'd also like to close out this week by thanking my mentor, those guys over at Last Scout Radio, who've been on the air for so long and have something new every night each week. I encourage you to go find LastScoutRadio.com for some entertainment that is a little bit different and not very newsy at all. It's more about music and fun and topics that we like to talk about. I want you to spend some time this week with your family and thinking about your mother and where we come from. We all have mothers, and we come from a long line of them, and the things that they teach us when we're young and how they influence who we become. Let's make sure we also support that legacy for the generations that come next, that we give them an example to follow, that we encourage them to live free, that we want them to be independent and not remain children, that we want to raise them up so they can be independent and healthy and wealthy and wise in the ways that we know are important and not the ways that the world would have them believe they should chase. It's not about keeping up appearances or keeping up with the Joneses. It's about finding your core, your truth, and doing what's right. From all of us over here at Atomic Biscuits, have a great week. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.